Liberalizing means reducing the policy, open upping the economy. So that is called as liberalization. When the expenditure was more than the income, so what our country did, they went to the financial institution, they borrowed money from the people in order to face the situation of deficit. So India approached the International Bank Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, popularly known as World Bank, and the IMF. Hello everybody, I'm your Divya ma'am, Assistant Professor from Department of Commerce and Management, lecturing with Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, the Temple of Excellence. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you all for the session 1 on your new chapter, that is your Unit 3, that is your Chapter 3, Economic Reform since 1991. So in the previous chapter, in the previous sessions, both the sessions we have discussed about the economic development during the period 1950 to 1990. So during that period, what was the reforms they have brought up? So our economic leaders and thinkers, so they have brought new economic policies, they have brought 5-year plan. So all these topics we have discussed in the last unit. And after that, after 1990, what is the next picture? So that will be explained in your chapter number 3, that is economic reform since 1991. So next to 1990, 1991, what are the economic developments we can see? What is the history that we have to understand about our economic development? So everything we'll study in this unit. Moving forward, the agenda, the topic for today's discussion is introduction part. We'll be discussing about the economic reform since 1991. What was the major thing that has happened to our country's economic development? And we'll also be discussing about the main topic of today's class, that is liberalization, and very important topic for your examination also. From this 4-mark question can also put up for you people. So for your examination point of view and for being an Indian, to understand about liberalization is very important. So today we are in the world of ChatGPT. We are in the world where we can trade all across the world. We are in e-commerce era. So how all these things have come into our India? What was the changes that we can see? All these things that we have to learn in our liberalization. So if today we are trading, we are in e-commerce era, is because of what? Because of the changes that they brought in 1991, that is our liberalization concept. Moving forward, in the year 1991, Government of India introduced the new economic policy. 1-mark question for you all. When was new economic policy was introduced? In 1991. So what was this policy was all about? The background for this policy was the government was not able to make the payments for the borrowings what they have taken. So during that time, they couldn't manage the revenues properly. So they were in the deficit situation. So there was lot of expenditure on the solving the economic problem. So during that time, they didn't had the money, they were not in the position to make payment to the borrowings. There was rise in the prices, and as a result, India approved IMF and World Bank. So as a result, so during that period, they couldn't afford the expenditure, the country's expenditure. So they approached the 2 financial institutions, that was, one was IMF, International Monetary Fund, the other was World Bank. These institutions expected India to liberalize and open up the economy. If we want to help you all, we want you to liberalize the country's policy. So it is very important to liberalize the policy. What is liberalizing? Liberalizing means reducing the policy, open upping the economy. So that is called as liberalization. India agreed these conditions and adopted the new economic policy. Since the institutions, the financial institution IMF and World Bank, they are called as Britain twins. Why? Because on the same day both the institutions was established. So India agreed and they introduced the new economic policy. So they tried to liberalize the rules and regulations. Earlier it was only the public sector that was there. All the undertakings were under the public sector, but now they gave an opportunity for private sectors also to establish their industry, to establish new companies into our India. Moving forward, the origin of financial crisis, if you want to know about the background, so why economic policy, new economic policy was introduced is because the origin of the financial crisis can be traced from the inefficient management of the Indian economy. So inefficient management during the period 1980 affected our Indian economy to manage, because they couldn't make the payment for the borrowings what they have made. There was lot of expenditure during that time. So there was inefficient management. When expenditure is more than income, when your expenses are more than your money, then the government borrows to finance the deficit from the banks and other people from the country and from the international financial institutions. So what happened when the expenditure was more than the income? So what our country did, they went to the financial institution, they borrowed money from the people in order to face the situation of deficit. So when we import goods like petroleum, we pay them in the dollars which we earn from our export. So what we do? We import petroleum products. So importing, we have to pay them in dollars, which is more than our currencies. Dollars are always more valuable than our currencies. So what happens? It will be more for us, a country, to import such products, that is petroleum. So what, when we export, there was very less money that we were getting because the value of currency changes. This was the situation why economic reforms was introduced, why changes was needed. So the one was, there was lot of exports and less imports. They couldn't they couldn't afford the export money because they were dealing in dollars. The other situation was they were making payments, but their borrowings they couldn't give it, so they had to approach the government, banks and the other financial institution for facing the problems of deficit. Moving forward, development policies required that even though the revenues were very low during that time, the government had to overshoot its revenue to meet the challenges like unemployment, poverty and population explosion. So during that time, there was lot of population explosion, there was more population and unemployment situation, poverty. So this, since we had lot of, the country is still the situation of deficit, but still they have to maintain, they have to solve this kind of problem, because if the well-being of the society is not taken care of, the country will go still in a bad situation. Moving forward, the continued spending on the development programs of the government did not generate any additional revenues, but there was lot of expenditure on developing the programs for creating an employment opportunity for the people and to eradicate the poverty. So all these are the problems that the government faced. That's why they need to change their economic reforms. The reforms mean changes. That's why they had to bring a new policies. The situation demanded them to bring the new policies. Moving forward, in late 1980s, government expenditure began to exceed its revenue by such large margin that meeting the expenditure through the borrowings become unsustainable. So even the borrowings they took, but it was not able to meet the demand. Prices of many essential goods, there was an inflation situation, the prices of goods was increased and import grew at very high. There was lot of imports that has happened. Imports means we are taking goods from the other countries. So we are giving money, we are buying it from the other countries, that is import. Import grew at a very high rate without matching growth of export. As a result, the deficit in the balance of payment was rose to $9.7 billion. So that was the deficit, that was the payment that the government have to make during the period. There was also not sufficient foreign exchange to pay the interest. There was no foreign exchange. International lenders, they were not investing on our company. So no country or international funders were willing to lend to India. Why? Because of this rate, $9.7 billion. It was rated in a dollars, wherein the government couldn't pay the money back. So India approached the International Bank Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, popularly known as World Bank, and the IMF. So even today, India is a member of IMF and World Bank, so wherein they have helped our people, our country for the development. Moving forward, they have received 7 billion as a loan to manage the crisis from IMF and the World Bank. For availing the loans, these international agencies expected to liberalize our India. So liberalize our India means deregular the policies what we have. So we want to open up the economy. Any industries can come, any private or public, any industries can come and set up in our India. So they opened up the economy. So they liberalized the rules and regulation with respect to the companies and industries. So this was the major reason economic reform were introduced. And open up the economy by removing restrictions on private sector, reduce the role of government in many areas, and removed mainly what? Trade restrictions. They wanted to remove what? Trade restrictions between India and the other country. On 24th July 1991, the government of India introduced the new economic policy which changed the direction of our developed country, which changed the entire nations, the expectation of entire nation was changed during this period. So because many of the companies, many of the industries, they set up their industries in our India because of this liberalization. So let us understand the liberalization meaning in a more understanding and a comprehensive manner. Liberalization is the process of removing government control and restrictions on economic activities and open up the various sectors of the economy. So government imposed lot of trade restrictions, trade barriers between different countries, and there was lot of restrictions on the private sectors. So that was liberalized, that was deregulated. That is called as liberalization. Liberalization was introduced to put an end to the restriction that become a major hindrance, drawback to our economic development, and to establish market-oriented economy. So we want market-oriented economy. So that's why they changed the policy called as liberalization. So during the new economic policy 1991, three things were introduced. LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. Liberalization, privatization and globalization. So they introduced liberalization, privatization and globalization. That was a very important thing that they did during the 1991, and which we see the remarkable change in our country today. The important liberalization measures are, in that liberalization, what are the changes that they have brought, in what regulation, what rules, what measures they have taken. Let us look into that. The first is deregulation of industrial sector. As I have mentioned you all, there was lot of restrictions, there was lot of rules and regulations that were imposed on the industries. So that was deregularized. So the industrial sector reform introduced 1991 and removed regulatory thing, work at a international competitiveness. So they are industrial license was abolished other than a list of 6 industries. So industrial license were given. So earlier it was not given. So they started giving license to the other industries except few of the things: alcohol, cigarette, hazardous chemicals and industrial explosive, aerospace and drug and pharmaceuticals. So leaving all this sector, they liberalized the policies for the other industries to set up in our country except all these different sector. Why? Because they are the major contribution for the revenue for the government for our India, and they can also misuse and mislead our country's resources. So for this purpose, they did not deregularize these industries. The industries reserved to public sector are reduced from 17 to 2 industries: railways and atomic industry, atomic energy, and the railway was only with the public, lest everything were privatized. That is your liberalization. De-reservation of item produced by the small scale industries. So this is the statistics that you can see. What they did, they de-reserved. So what all the small scale industries produced, everything where we can sell it through all across the globe. Determinants of price of industrial sector reforms in according to market price. So they can set the produced product as per the market price. So they deregularized all these things. Earlier it was in the government sector. So based on market force, market price, they can fix up the prices. Non-discriminatory treatment between the private sector allowed to major industries. So they did not discriminate, they encouraged the public sector. Next, financial sector reform if we wanted to talk about. So financial sector reforms introduced to control the inflation, to stabilize the value of rupee with respect to international market, and to reduce the role of RBI from the regulatory of financial sector. When we want to talk about why there was more control on finance was because to stabilize the value of money. Later what they did, they wanted to bring the changes, because since we are trading with different countries, we need to have the same value of money, or else the import money, as we discussed, the value of money will not be there. Purchasing price, the PPP, the purchasing power will reduce. The financial sector reforms are establishment of private sector banks. There was no private sector banks earlier. Now they established the new private sector banks all across the world. Foreign institutional investors, FIIs, foreign institutional investors were allowed. Foreign direct investments was allowed, granting complete autonomy to public sector banks. Selected banks were allowed to capital. They gave complete freedom, autonomy. The public sector was autonomy. They were given freedom to convert into private sector. Reduction in SLR and CRR and bank rate to increase the availability of funds at a lower interest rate. So to give them in a lower interest rate, they reduced all those things. Administered credit schemes and rate of interest in phase out. So these are the financial sector reforms you can see. Moving forward, tax reform, the changes in the tax slab, tax rate, or the tariff and the removal of tariff and the non-tariff barriers. The taxation and the expenditure policy of the government is called as fiscal policy, very important concept. So the government is looking after taxation and the expenditure part of the money, and that is called as what? Fiscal policy. The tax reform related to increase in income to reduce the expenditure of the government was to control the fiscal deficit. Deficit means less, expenditure is more, income is less. So in that case, what happens? To balance this fiscal policies, the government policies was introduced. What was that? The rate of direct tax, income tax and corporation tax lowered to promote savings and better compliance of taxpayer. They reduced the tax rate in order to protect the taxpayers. Next, with respect to foreign exchange changes, what are the liberalization? What they lessened, or what the development that they wanted to do with respect to foreign exchange? Foreign exchange reform means the steps introduced to increase export and to control the import in order to solve the problem of balance of payment. So what was the reforms? As an immediate measure to resolve the balance of payment crisis, the rupee was devalued against foreign currencies. They devalued the money. What they did? They devalued the money in order to solve the problem of foreign currency. So this was the changes that they brought in foreign exchange reform. This led to increase in the export and decrease in the import, raise in the inflow of foreign exchange reserve. There was lot of foreign exchange reserve as a result as they devalued the rupee value. And full convertibility of rupee in the current account has been introduced to promote export. So what they introduced? Full convertibility of rupees. They can convert the rupee into current account and they can utilize it to promote the export. So trade and investment policy reform, liberalization of trade and investment regime was initiated to increase the international They wanted to bring our industry to the international level. That was their main objective. The trade reforms are dismantling the quantitative restrictions on import and exports. They had a quantity restriction. For example, 500, 600 quantity should be exported or imported. That restrictions they removed. Reduction in tariff rate, gradually export duties have been removed. So export duties they removed, reduction in tax rates they did, removal of license from the procedure of import. So they removed the licenses. So all these things that we have discussed in liberalization with respect to the trade, with respect to foreign exchange policy, and we have also discussed about the different financial sector reforms that they have done. So that's it for today's, my dear students. Smile is the biggest jewel you can wear, people. Keep smiling. Thank you.